Okay, good afternoon, everyone. So, how are you keeping awake? Are you saturated with sessions and saturated with hamburger? Okay. Okay, so what I want to look at in this short session, 45 minutes, is to give you an idea of how authentication works with Azure AD, what we can get from Azure AD, and just to sort of help you create a vision of what things might look like in the future. So first of all, we've got quite a lot to cover. Some of it's going to be very, very brief. I want to just start off having a quick look at today's identity challenges, see where Azure AD fits in as a role, just talk about Azure AD users. I'm going to briefly mention the single sign-on methods, briefly, because there's one slide, whereas we had however many slides it was for this morning's session. So for those who didn't come to this morning, I want to look at assigning applications to users, how we do that, how we actually register applications in Azure AD. And then finally, I want to finish off with just reaching out. I've called it reaching out to sort of partners, to consumers, so B2B, B2C, and then what is this thing called a multi-tenant app as well. So that's what I intend to cover, so let's get kicked off. So today's identity challenge. With today, what we have is we have resources absolutely everywhere. They're protected resources, but they might be on-prem. They might be our resources. They might be in a partner cloud. They might be in a public cloud, typical sort of Office 365 in a public cloud, or you might have maybe your own private cloud that you've got resources in. All of those resources need to be protected, and what we want is this guy over here, or girl over here, and she wants to be able to gain access to absolutely everything using any type of device, and it should all be seamless and just work. Nice idea? Nice idea. Okay. Then there's a few little challenges. What we want is the support for multi-hop. So here we come in, we authenticate to the front end here, and then we hop off to go and get data from other resources. And in terms of when we do that hop, are we hopping with the identity of that server or that service, or are we hopping with the identity of the user? I mean, a lot of this is down to architectural design of the application, but we want to be able to deal with both scenarios. So yes, go to the back end with the identity of this service, or go to the back end with the identity of the user that's logged in. And then another scenario we want to deal with is a server which actually continues to access resources on behalf of a user, and the user's no longer there. So the user's logged off. So somehow this guy needs to be able to carry on accessing back-end resources. He's going to be using a security token of some kind. And what we need to be able to do is renew that security token despite the fact the user has disappeared. Right? So lots of different scenarios that we need to deal with. And I sort of think of it, and I've used this slide for a while now, sort of anywhere, anyone, anything. Where's your app? The answer is, or your service, anywhere. So it's on your premises, it's a partner, it's somewhere else. We don't care. What we want is a mechanism that will work regardless of its location. And then the user, users from our own org, users from partner orgs, consumers, right, using any device. And then where's the identity for these users? Well, it could be that they're coming from our own organization. And, you know, if we've got on-premises AD, maybe we'd like to source them from there. That would be the source of authority. But maybe it's from a partner organization, or maybe a third-party enterprise identity provider. Okay, who can name a fairly well-known third-party identity provider? Microsoft, yes. I was waiting for that one. Somebody... So of course, Azure AD, but there's lots and lots, and there's ones that work for niche markets as well. So in particular industry sectors, you'll find identity providers. In the US, for the car industry, Covisint is a very well-known identity provider, and so it goes on. And then, of course, social identity providers, we're talking about, you know, someone with maybe a Google Gmail account gets in Facebook and so on. What we need to do is connect this a lot up, so we don't care where the application is, we don't care where the user's identity comes from, and we don't care who the user is. But of course we do care, because we want to make sure we've got protected access to these resources. So what we need is federation to join it all up. Now, this is the federation protocol flow, and it doesn't really matter which protocol you're using. The flow is very, very similar. So the idea is our user comes to the app detects the user is not authenticated. Normally, once you've authenticated to the app will probably give you back a cookie, but not always, because if you're going to a web API, it's stateless, therefore cookies aren't used. All right? But we go there, identifies us as not being authenticated, and redirects us up to a security token service that app trusts. Now, that security token service may be able to authenticate us as a user. On the other hand, maybe it can't, but maybe it knows something about where we come from, and therefore can send us off to our own identity provider. But let's make it simple for this one. We're going to say this security token service can authenticate the user. The user authenticates. Having authenticated, it creates a token which is passed back. That token is then sent to the app, and what's going to happen is the app will open up that token and it will validate it. One of the things that the first question is to ask is say, is it for me? Right? There's an audience on there. Right? If it's not for that app, it should, I'd say should, reject it. Right? But it's all down to the security around things. An app should not consume a token that is not for it. Right? And the next thing it will do is it will check timestamps on there, and then it'll check a signature. And the trust is between this guy and this guy, and it's about trusting that signature. So we validate the token, check the signature, and return cookies and a page. If you were working in your beautifully enclosed, cozy on-prem AD environment, everything would be in the same domain or in the same forest or in trusted forests. All right? Here, what we're doing, because we're trusting a signed token, we can trust that token from anywhere if we set it up properly. And so what's happening is you're no longer in that nice, cozy security boundary of on-prem, your forest on-prem, where you can trust from any security token service where you've said, okay, I will trust that signature. All right, a token signed by that guy, I trust. And therefore, your boundary actually becomes authentication. Protocols, very, very important. How do we transport these tokens around? Well, traditional protocols were SAML-P and WS star, right? And Microsoft particularly championed WS Federation and WS Trust. These guys work fine. However, they use a very heavyweight XML token. And that token is beautifully described. I mean, you can look at this and you can say, primary SID. It comes out of this namespace, so you can look it up, and there's the SID value, and all beautifully described. However, because it's pretty heavyweight, it's quite difficult to parse, right? It's quite difficult to validate, right? And it's quite difficult to transmit, because it can get very, very big. And it doesn't really work when we go for the game changers. And of course, the game changers are these guys. All right, we expect everything to work with our mobile devices, tablets, and so on. And we also expect it to work with different types of applications these days. You might have a native app which runs on a desktop, or it might run on a mobile device. You might have a single page app or a SPA, which is basically JavaScript running inside the browser. So what happens, you connect to a website, and the website piles a whole bunch of JavaScript into the browser. And now the browser renders data. But where does it get the data from? By going to back-end web APIs. And those are protected resources, and what we have to do is authenticate to them. So somehow we need a way of authenticating to those back-end resources. And then we've got standard web app. So here we've got a web app. You come knocking on the front door as a user. You need to authenticate to the front end, but then this web app goes off to different web APIs in the back end. And those web APIs could be absolutely anywhere. So there's a number of issues there. Do we go with the identity of the app to those web APIs, or do we go with the identity of the user? All right? And then the question is, it's not in our cozy little environment where our admin's in total control. Those web APIs may be in all sorts of locations. So now, if this app is going to go to that web API, that one, and that one, on behalf of the user, shouldn't we get the user to consent to that happening? So we need to have a consent framework. So we can actually, when the user logs in, it can be asked to consent to the fact that this app is going to go to those back-end web APIs on their behalf. So it's another component that we need to add in. And then, of course, we've got web APIs we need to get to. And web APIs, pretty much these days, ubiquitously, are RESTful APIs. And so every time we go to that back-end web API, they're completely stateless. We need to pass a token across. So we need new protocols to handle it. And the modern authentication protocols, you've got OAuth 2. And OAuth 2 is really about going from this front-end web application to back-end web APIs. Sometimes. But then if you have a single-page application running JavaScript, it will go to back-end web APIs. And that's where we'll be using OAuth 2. But OAuth 2 is really about delegation. It's about giving permission for this single-page app or this web server to go to back-end web APIs acting on the user's behalf. So it's really about a delegation protocol. Layered on top of that, we have OpenID Connect. And OpenID Connect is about authenticating to the front end. So let's take our web API. Sorry, not our web API, our web server. There's our web server. Knock on the front door. Okay, this guy is going to prove identity to him. What he'll do is he will use OpenID Connect as the protocol and supply an ID token. And then when this guy goes from himself to the back-end web API, he will be using an access token. So the protocol coming in at the front end is OpenID Connect. The protocol from there to the back end is OAuth 2. And the JSON Web Token is actually mandated for OpenID Connect. It's not mandated for OAuth 2, but most implementations now use it. JSON Web Token, in contrast to a SAML token, is beautifully simple. It consists of 3 components. They're actually separated by a dot. We've got the header, we've got the body, and we've got the signature. And if you look at the body, it sort of describes what's going on. What's the first one? Aud. What do you think that means? Audience, yeah, that was nice ease. IAT, little bit more tricky. It's a time, by the way. That's epoch time. Issued at is when it was issued, right? And of course, what the app will do is it for me? Right? Are the timestamps correct? Great, fantastic. Is the signature valid? Do I trust this signature? And then it will then use all of that information. So that gives you an idea of what's going on. But what about, where does Azure AD fit? Azure AD, we become a tenant in a multi-tenant environment, which is the Azure cloud. And we look after our data in that tenant. We don't have to worry about all the things we have to worry about on-prem. Oh, how many DCs do we want for scalability? You know, can we authenticate well enough with the number of DCs we've got? Everything is cloud scalable, all right? The other thing, no backup to worry about. It's all looked after for us by the Azure cloud itself. How do we get our data in there? Well, there's 2 management portals at the moment. One will be retired, probably by the end of the year, maybe not. Hopefully by the end of the year anyway. You've got PowerShell, you've got graph APIs that you can programmatically access the content, the data content, and then we can take users from on-prem and we can synchronize them up into the cloud. Once you've got a user up there and the user can authenticate, you basically open them up to a completely new world of applications. So what application? Your apps. So you could have your own apps that you allow your users to gain access to. Office 365, the Azure subscription as well you can do. But Microsoft supply an application gallery, right, with, I don't know, 3,800 odd applications in. And the idea is these are third-party apps. They help you create a single sign-on solution for. So what I can do is I can choose an application from gallery, assign a user to it, and that user will have a single sign-on experience to that app. And then, of course, partner apps as well. So we could basically allow our user to go, obviously with the collaboration of the partner, access partner applications. Once the user signs in there, SSO to everything. So what would be very useful is not just to have this thing where we put our users, but it to do everything we want it to do. So it supports all the protocols we need. It will also support the traditional SAML-P and WS Federation protocols as well. It supports Windows Kerberos authentication, and we can do that by using the Azure AD application proxy. So we can publish an on-prem Windows Auth app and make it available via a public URL. And then when people come to sign in, they will sign in using an Azure AD identity. Self-service. So self-service for lots of things. So self-service to applications, self-service to groups. If you don't want self-service, turn it off. Self-service for password resets. So we can configure that very, very easily. MFA. One of the quickest ways of deploying MFA is through the Azure portal. It's very, very quick and very powerful because it ties in with conditional access. And I will show you that in a second. Identity protection is really important. We're putting all our eggs in one basket. We better make sure that's a good basket. And what identity protection will do is it will actually run and look at risk of users. So is a user coming in from anonymous IP, i.e. they're coming out the back end of a torrent tunnel, which is probably not what you expect, right? Have they got impossible travel? So are they logging in 3 different places where they couldn't possibly travel between in the time span, right? Of course, that impossible travel, they could VPN into New York, VPN into Dubai within 5 minutes and do an authentication from both locations. So it could be absolutely valid. So rather than just blocking users and saying, oh, they're at risk, what we've got is machine intelligence in the background, which is analyzing user behavior. Your details go out and get compromised. They're detected if they're on the dark web, your username and password. That would flag a user as being high risk. Okay? So identity protection is really, really important. You need a P2 license to go for that. And as well, there's lots of other features that we can use and we can enable. There are different flavors, and I'm not going to even talk about the different flavors, just to say there's a free version going up to the P2 version. Microsoft would like you to have this one. Any idea why? Money. What I've got is I've just got a very, very good link. There's a very good table there now, which is well worth looking at if you want to just check out all the different features. Okay, so let's actually do a quick demo of looking and managing Azure AD. So what I want to do is we'll just switch over here, and I'm going to go into my Azure AD portal. I'm logged on as a particular user. That user is highlighted up the top here, and actually let's do that. Okay, that user is highlighted there. That's the currently logged on user, and these are the directories the user can work with. Okay, to work with a directory, well, if they want to do any administrative tasks, they have to have an administrative role of some kind within the directory. But so I'm going to be working with this MSC4A directory. So we've got that selected down here, as we can see. let's go over and choose the Azure AD Blade. And again, lots of features, but what I'm going to do is start off in users and groups, and I'm going to go to all users. And now I can see that I have a whole bunch of different users, and some of them have got different icons, but what do they really mean? So let's go and go to choose columns in here and switch on user type and source of authority. Okay, so now it looks slightly differently. So let's do that, and what we'll do is we've got Azure Active Directory. These are users that have been created in Azure AD. Doesn't mean have been created in our tenant. They exist in our tenant. But where their original homed realm is a different matter. I'll come back on that in a second. And then we've got down here, we've got server AD. So this is someone that's actually been synchronized from on-prem. And then over here, we have member. So this is a guy that has been created in our own Azure AD, has full membership. These are guests. And these guys have probably been invited in through the business-to-business process. So you can invite people from other directories. And in fact, what we can see is we can actually invite people in these days from Gmail accounts as well. So they could have come in from other directories, or they could come in from different, we could bring them in from a social media directory of some kind. But that's through the business-to-business process. Let's go and have a look now at password resets. Now I said self-service password reset. Let's just look at it. We just turn it on, and we apply it to group of users. Obviously, they've got to have the right license to be able to do it. And then you say authentication methods. Well, I'm going to say to do a self-service, you use email or you do mobile. This is to get the confirmation of the self-service reset. And I just want you to choose one method. I could switch it to two methods. So if you do change your password, you will have to get a code from an email and get a code from a phone. Or maybe we just go for security questions, whatever method you need. But it's very, very simple to set that up. But let's go and look at one other feature down here. And this is, where are we? Conditional access. And I have a conditional access policy, which is MFA1 in here. And I'm assigning this conditional access policy, so I could assign it to a users and groups. I've actually just assigned it to David Grimm, okay? And this is the policy applied to him. And then I'm going to say, this policy will apply when it's David Grimm, and when David Grimm is going to this particular application, okay? So Microsoft Azure Management. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to choose a condition. And I can choose a whole series of conditions. So sign-in risk. This is where identity protection has identified some form of sign-in risk. So I can choose whether it's high, medium, low, no risk. I'm not going to apply that one. I've then got the device platform. So I can say now, what I could do is I could say if it's David Grimm and he's using Azure Management, and he's medium risk, and he's using an Android, all right? So I can make a very complex conditional access policy, but we'll just move on from that. I'm not assigning that. Any location, I've actually said, I've chosen any location. And then finally, client app, is he using a browser or is he using a desktop application? And then, having got all these conditions, I say, what are we going to do? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to grant access. But I'm only going to grant access if you use multi-factor. All right, so if you meet all the conditions, I will grant access, but you've got to use multi-factor. So let's actually go and have a look at David's experience. And what we can do is actually just check out this. What we'll do is we'll start off, and I'm going to go to an application, this sort of test app I use all the time for testing all the different protocols. I'm going to go in as David. This is David Grimm, supplying his password, signing in, absolutely no problem at all. Okay, but if you remember, we applied the multi-factor to when he's going to the Azure management portal. So let's leave the guy logged in. So we'll keep this browser session, and now what we're going to do is we're going to go to the portal.azure.com, and immediately it's prompting now for multi-factor credentials. So let me just get the text message. Here we go. And then we can sign in. And there we are. So to go to the portal, we require multi-factor authentication. So I think it gives you an idea of the power of conditional access and the way that we can set that up. And say it's all pretty intuitive as the way that we do this. You know, the fact that you can put together a self-service reset really quickly, you know, with a high degree of security, because you can choose 2 factors that you need to give. Okay, sign-in methods for on-premise users. I covered this morning, so I'm going to do this very quickly. But before we do that, cloud-only user. Cloud-only user is a user purely defined in the cloud, all right? No on-premise AD associated with that user at all. And what we can do is we can push a Windows 10 device into, register it in the cloud as well. The user can then sign into the Windows 10 device, and then they've got SSO to everything that's assigned to them. Okay, so very nice solution, and I've used this a number of times with startup organizations. But if you do have on-prem, we need to take our on-prem users and sync them up there. You might want to sync some information back. If you do self-service reset, you might actually want to push the password back into your on-prem AD. In which case we use write back on the password. All of this is done now is through Azure AD Connect. It's a sync engine plus plus, and the plus plus is the ability to do the write backs. It's the ability to also configure the single sign-on methods. So here, what we've got is we've got our first single sign-on method is where we're using password hash synchronization. Now, if you came to the session this morning, I explained that this was very badly named by Microsoft as password synchronization. Actually, it's quite safe because it's a very complex hash that gets... So on-prem password is taken, it's hashed while it's on premises and brought up into the cloud. So now, at the cloud, we gather the username and password and check it against this complex hash in Azure AD. So no interaction going down to on-prem AD. New is the pass-through authentication. So now we're gathering username and password in the cloud, and then we're passing it down through a secure channel. Password is encrypted as well, down to an authn agent, which is on-prem. And what the authn agent does is attempts to authenticate the user using the username and password against the on-prem AD. So we're actually authenticating directly against on-prem AD. And then, of course, the federation with ADFS is where we detect the fact that the user is from a federated domain, right? And of course, we're doing that with the UPN suffix. And then we send the user down to their on-prem AD. They authenticate with the on-premise AD. So those are our sort of 3 main methods. To go with the pass-through authentication went to GA 2 weeks ago. Password hash synchronization, which used to be called password synchronization, no changes there. It's just that it's seen as a good solution, and we're trying to redirect people as to it being reasonably safe. Question? Okay, if you didn't come to this morning's session.
I did, but I saw this matrix and...
Yeah, the matrix will be available as a download. So have a look at that. The alternative is I've done a blog on it. So if you look up my name, John Craddock, Mastering Identity, look for part 8 of the blog, and it goes through all the details. Or I'll discuss it with you after, because it'll take too long to do now. All right? Okay. And then to combine with pass-through authentication and also password hash synchronization, we got seamless single sign-on that's now available. Okay, so how do we assign applications to users? We got a user, this plethora of applications out there, and traditionally what you do is each application would probably have its own identity store of some kind. And what a nightmare that was. So learning and remembering multiple passwords, all right? Or maybe you didn't, you wrote them down, or maybe you used the same password on every site, right? Which a lot of people did. It's a real problem. So we're going to try and address that. The other real problem is orphaned accounts. So, you know, you've got a user which has now been assigned to a partner app. The user leaves your organization, but does anyone remember to tell the partner to disable that user's account in their identity store? So what we want to do is bring the identity store back. And the way that we do it, of course, is we use Azure AD as our single identity store for getting access to all of these applications. Now, how do we do SSO with those applications? It depends on the app itself. So we can choose apps, and there's a whole gallery of them that we can choose, or we can use our own apps. And in terms of authentication, we can use federation. So we might have a situation where we're actually federating with some protocol, and it could well be that it's a SAML protocol. So for federating between the application and Azure AD. We can use password vault, or we could use an existing single sign-on solution. So it's federating with Azure AD, a password vault where we're holding credentials for the user, or we've already got a single sign-on solution that's already been fixed between us as an organization and the target system. Maybe we're using something like ping identity or something along those lines. In terms of password vaulting, the user logs into Azure AD, go to a target application, and what will happen is out of the password vault, the credentials for that target application will automatically be populated. It's done through injecting into a web browser. So very similar to a lot of password, technologies that are out there. But our passwords here released by signing into Azure AD and held in a secure vault in Azure AD. The other nice thing you can do is you can assign a password to a group. So you could have a group of users, right, which have a single password to gain access to an account. Very typically, it's used for things like corporate Twitter accounts. All right, we have one corporate Twitter account, but actually we need 5 users that can use it. So it can be done through that. So access 2,800 plus applications. You set up your own apps. You use on-premise apps which you're publishing out through the Azure app proxy. You using non-gallery apps. Gallery apps are third-party apps. If you don't find it in the gallery, you can ask Microsoft to add it, and enough people are asking, they will add it to the gallery. Or you can do custom configuration through this last option here. Or we choose something from gallery. And then what it will do is it will help you configure them. Once you've chosen something from gallery, you've assigned it to a user, it appears in their access panel. So what I'm going to do is just sort of demo putting a SaaS app in from gallery. So what we'll do is we'll go and grab one of these guys. And I'm going to go into the portal. And I'm going to choose down here, Enterprise Applications. And I'm going to assign the enterprise application to user. But which one? I'm going to choose from gallery. And I'm going to just make life very easy for myself. I'm going to use LinkedIn. Okay, so there's LinkedIn. And we add it. Having added it, well, we have to wait a few seconds while it actually gets added. It then comes up with a whole bunch of help for you, all right? So an overview, which you read, and then we'll need to assign a user for testing. So we need to assign a user. So I'm going to choose a user here. We can do a group assignment, of course, or I can add individual user. So I'm going to add my user, John. And I've got a number of Johns, but I'm going to go for John Williams, who's an on-prem AD user. Assign that. And then what I have to choose is the single sign-on method. Okay, so the single sign-on method, by default, is disabled. And what I'm going to do is use a password-based sign-on. Select that and save it. And now we're all ready to go and try John's experience once that's saved, which it is. Okay, so we can now go and have a look. So we're going to go into the access panel, and what you should see is LinkedIn pop into his access panel. So we're going in as John. And I've got single sign-on enabled here. And there's LinkedIn just arrived in the access panel, which we've just added. And off we go to LinkedIn. And what we need to supply the credentials for LinkedIn the first time around. So I'll just use my standard email address, which most people, of course, use their standard email address these days. I'm happy, but I won't tell you my password. And then we sign in. That should get us into the account. Credentials have been updated successfully, so they're now in the password vault. And yep, well, yes, okay, yeah, got the credentials right. So we're in. So let's go and just have a look at that experience again. But this time what I'm going to do is I'm going to use domain hints for the access panel. So now I don't even have to select the user. It's the currently logged in user. I choose LinkedIn. And I should now have seamless SSO into LinkedIn as well. Once it gets there. Okay, so that's sort of taking an application from gallery and assigning it to a user. We can register our own apps. So when we're creating our own apps, we register those into the portal. And the way that we do it is we define an application template. Application template consists of some settings in the UI and also a manifest file. When we actually, having used this for the first time, it creates a service principal which actually represents that application in our tenant. And what we may have to do for the application is define its relations to backends. Remember, I had this web app and was going to this web API, this web API, this web API with different permissions. I need to define those in the UI. And the reason I define them in the UI is so that we can ask for consent appropriately. There's a big change coming in that space. There's V2 endpoints. And V2 endpoints use dynamic consent. So now what happens is we don't have to declare all the consents the app needs right at the beginning. Because basically what will happen is the poor user will suddenly be told, you know, application X wants to go there, 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 there with all these different permissions. And there's a huge consent screen. And the user will just go, oh, accept. Right? Or we could actually have the administrator accept on their behalf. With dynamic consent, we just ask for what we want when we want to go to a back-end system, and therefore we can actually increase the ask. V2 endpoints are sort of in their infancy. There's also a different registration portal that we use for if we're testing V2 endpoints. At some point, V2 will become the primary endpoint, but I can see that is a while away. And then Azure AD application, Proxy, what we have is the proxy sitting up there, which gives out a public URL, and then we have a connector, which is a secure connector coming on-prem, and then we can publish out our on-premise applications. And all this guy needs to do is needs outbound ports, because it's this guy that makes the connection into the Azure AD.
Sorry, one question.
Yep.
Last sheet, there was add roles. Can you do like authorization in metadata for the custom app?
So in terms of add roles, yes. Oh, in custom app, you mean, do you mean a new V2 endpoint, or do you mean?
No, I mean like you build your own app.
Yeah, then you go into the manifest and add your roles.
Okay.
Yeah, it's done through the manifest though.
For that application.
Yes, yeah. Actually, let's let's do a very, very quick demo on that. So what I've got here is I'm just going into, I mean, we could spend hours in here without any problem at all. I'm going to go into registering an application in here. And under the app registration, I'm not going to register a new app. I'm just going to show you. So here you've got various settings, and in terms of properties, you've got object IDs and app IDs and app ID URIs. And actually, this is a very interesting area. Here, this is inside your AD, Azure AD. I'm talking here to IT pros, all right? This is your identity infrastructure. And suddenly, you've got all these devies type things. And what I've seen is actually the devs taking this over and deploying the applications, and the IT guys not really knowing what's going on. It's really important that you come to a very close relationship in terms of deploying apps, knowing exactly what's going on in your Azure AD identity infrastructure. So, I mean, one of the things we do, I have a masterclass, and one of the things we do is we go into all the details of the protocols, all the details of this. It's focused for IT pros, but it's so you really understand it by the time you finish. Anyway, properties are in there. Require permissions. This is where we set up the permissions we require for consent. So as an example, I have application permissions, which are permissions for the application going to the back end using its identity, and I have delegated permissions. And these will appear in consent screens. Or I can automatically grant consent. And then if you want to get into setting up roles and all sorts of other bits, you go into the manifest. And the manifest you used to have to download, but now you can edit it directly. So there's a lot of complexity there. What I want to do is just show you one, a Windows Auth application. This is published out through the web application proxy. So I'm actually logging in to a on-prem Windows Auth app. So what happened is I went to the proxy endpoint. It says you can't come through here until you're authenticated. So up to Azure AD, we authenticated to using Azure AD credentials, and then what it's done is uses Kerberos constrained delegation to do a protocol transition between a claim back to a Kerberos token. And that brings us in there. In terms of registering and reaching out to partners, what we've got is we've got the ability to create a multi-tenant app. And if you create a multi-tenant app, it means anyone from any tenant can produce a security token to gain access to that app, right? So it's down to the app to decide who is allowed to access it. Are we going to allow people from tenant B? The app needs to decide. Are we going to allow individuals from tenant B? The app will need to decide. But what it does, it gives you a very quick way of publishing application that's available to every tenant in Azure AD. As an alternative to that, we can use B2B. And with B2B, we invite someone in to come and join us. And that user comes in and they become as an external user, as a guest user. We can then assign that guest user to applications. We can put that guest user into groups. We don't like the guest user anymore. We can just remove them. And this is done, as I say, through an invitation process, inviting someone in, they redeem the invitation, and then they're provisioned in here. So when John actually goes to access this, John will be detected as an external user. They will be sent to their home realm directory to authenticate. So we've got a lot of control there. And the last method is we can use B2C, which is actually a new directory. This is not, you don't do B2C in your own tenant. You create a B2C tenant, and we have endpoints where we can do a sign-up policy, a sign-in policy, an editing policy, and there are a number of other policies. This is highly customizable, and you can see that out the box, there's a few identity providers we can use. So we could use a Microsoft identity or a Facebook identity to allow different users to gain access to our application that we publish in there. Okay, I'm actually not going to have time for this demo, which I'd like to do, so I'm going to just move on. If you really want to get into all the protocols and everything else, come to my masterclass. The other thing is have a look at my TechNet blog question. I might have to defer it until the end, if that's okay. Is that all right? Because we've run out of time, and I need to move before the next person comes. But if you have the SSO question, have a look at this blog here, which goes into the SSO. And that, in 45 minutes, is as much as I can possibly cover. I hope you found it a useful session. If you've got questions, let me just move off here over to there so the next speaker can come in, and then I'm very happy to answer your questions. And thanks for coming.